Welcome everyone to Marketing Management and Money. We are excited to be doing an interview with Karl Swanepoel today. Karl is the CEO and founder of Revolancer Beta. It's a platform designed to empower independent professionals and freelancers by facilitating the skills exchange to build their service businesses. Karl has a strong background in artificial intelligence and robotics and studied at Aberystwyth University in Wales. Karl's entrepreneurial journey began at a young age when he encountered the challenge faced by freelancers. At the age of 15, he founded BuySellJobs and sold it for a modest sum to a company before his 16th birthday, which made Karl one of the youngest ever brand ambassadors for The Business Show, Britain's largest business conference. He continued to serve as an ambassador and was given the opportunity to have a stall and deliver a keynote speech at the 2018 show held in the Excel Centre in London. Today, Karl Swanepoel is leading an energetic and passionate team at Revolancer, determined to revolutionize the freelance industry and restore freedom to freelancers worldwide. So, Karl, thank you so much. We are grateful to have you on the show. And give us a little bit, what exactly is the mission and vision behind Revolancer?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. And essentially, my goal with Revolancer is to change the freelancing industry for the better, because I started as a freelancer myself. Like you said, I spotted issues with the industry that I wanted to do something about. And my eventual goal with Revolancer is to change the whole industry for the better.
I mean, not a small goal. It's just... So, as a freelancer, are we talking all levels of freelancer? Are you staying with tech, or do you just look at anything and say, yeah, if it's freelance, it fits?
Well, certainly, long term, it'll be any kind of freelancing. But for the time being, we focus specifically on remote services. So it doesn't have to be just tech. It can be accounting or design or really anything, but as long as it can be done remotely.
Awesome. So I want to jump back into Revolancer more in detail, but I got to find out, at age 15, you're already starting a company and selling it. And I mean, I know that you sold it for a modest profit, but still, that's a huge accomplishment. So what was going through your mind at such a young age? And I assume that really kind of springboarded you into where you are today. Can you give us a little bit of the story? I mean, here you are, 15-year-old, kind of throwing something out there. It actually sticks. It actually works. What's going through your mind? What are you thinking? And how did that bring you to where you are today?
Sure. Well, I mean, I started freelancing a little bit before that. I realized that the existing freelancing platforms just weren't working right, and that wasn't where my future was. So I tried to do something about it. So I started BuySellJobs, as a competing freelancing platform. I started with, really close to nothing. I had about £200, which I had saved up. That's maybe $250 saved up over a long time.
Right.
Kind of plunged that all into the website, getting it launched. And then once it was live, I didn't have any budget left. So I didn't have any kind of promotional budget. So spent a lot of time kind of reaching out to freelancers myself on Twitter and in other places, kind of inviting them onto my platform. And it was, like a bit of slow growth right at the beginning, but then it started snowballing because people were telling other freelancers about the platform. And yes, I did sell it, but I didn't want to. The reason I sold it is basically because as the platform was picking up more and more traction and more people were buying things, PayPal kept locking my account and asking me to, amongst other things, verify that I was 18 in order to unlock them. So I realized that wasn't sustainable. And in order to have the best outcome for the freelancers, I had to end up selling the platform.
Okay. So you decided to sell, and instead of find a big brother or someone that was 18 and say, hey, can you just, start on, I guess that's a lot of company to give over for just the fact of them being a little bit older to unlock an account. So.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I did try my parents. I asked them if I could just have a PayPal account in their name to use this platform, but they are quite risk averse. They said they didn't want to lose their house. So that was a dead end, unfortunately.
Wow, how funny is that? So, okay, after you sold, what was going through your mind? Because, I mean, here you are, you were 16 at this point, right? Okay, so you're 16, you've just successfully sold a business, which is a big accomplishment because, a lot of people struggle to, sell their business. And so you've successfully sold a business, but you still have this challenge of, hey, you're only 16. What's going through your mind? What were kind of some of the next steps? What did you do for the next several years while I guess you were waiting to get a little older?
Yeah, well, I kept working on different businesses. At that point, I started working with an entrepreneur based in Germany who had a very large social media marketing company, and I was kind of working with him. I worked with a lot of different clients. I then started a web and marketing agency when I was 18 and got an office on my local high street with that. And that's what I kind of exhibited at the business shows as well. And then I went to university, and then halfway through my final year, I thought, well, I'm older than 18 now. These freelancing platforms are still doing these horrendous things that they've always done and never change. So now I'll have a go again at changing it for the better, and that's when I started Revolancer.
Wonderful. Okay, so let's dive into this a little bit. You keep talking about these freelance platforms and how they're so frustrating, and I can tell you from my experience. So my son, he is 17, not quite that 18 magical number. He's 17 years old, and he does 3D design, CAD design, and so he actually works for a company right now and does 3D design for them, but he is interested in freelancing. And so we had this experience, and this is prior to me ever meeting with you. We had this experience where he was trying to get into that freelance market, and he had this problem of finding a good platform and having a nice avenue to get into it. His skill set in the 3D design space is, it's a great skill set, and so he doesn't have a problem of getting the designs completed. He has a problem of connecting with the end users. So that's a little bit of my personal experience. I'd like to hear from you. What are some of the frustrations that you saw in the freelance world? Because there's so many, thousands if not millions of freelancers out there who are, they're trying to get out there. They're trying to, have a space that works for them where they can share their skills, make a decent, profit at it. What exactly were the problems that you saw, and what are some of the problems that you were able to solve with Revolancer?
Sure. And really at the face of it, it can be boiled down to two main things. And the first thing is that existing platforms rely on commission fees as their business model. Mm-hmm. But, when we think about commission fees in most industries, we're thinking, and it depends what it is, obviously, but
sure.
Maybe like sub 5% in a lot of industries, so commission, maybe 10%. But in the freelancing platforms industry, it's quite common to have 25% commission, which is just an obscene amount. And then the problem is, and this, links to the second problem, is that if you rely on charging an obscene commission fee to make money, people will try and avoid that commission fee, surely. Mm-hmm. So that means you have to really police how people communicate, and you have to stop people from exchanging email addresses, phone numbers. You can't let people video call. You really have to police how they communicate. So then you really disrupt their workflow and make it just an absolute pain to actually make meaningful connections on these platforms. So we solve those two problems in a very simple way. We simply do not charge commission fees, and therefore we do not need to police people's communication, and we allow them to video call and do everything else as well.
Wow. Okay. Simple and straightforward. Like, I love it. So here's another thing that I'm curious about. I see that a lot of these freelance platforms, they leverage the currency exchange to make sense. And so what they'll do is they'll go, I'm based here in the United States, and, the US dollar is definitely a major currency in the world. And if I ever look at a freelancer, they're coming from countries that have very minor currencies. And because of the currency exchange, those people can then, like their cost of living relative to a US dollar is much lower, and so they can make money. But I always, and this is just me in the back of my mind, I always feel like it's kind of limiting the number of creative artists. And I look at it and I'm just like, okay, so do I have to be geographically located in a certain country in order to be a successful freelancer? And so I'm just curious. Could you talk to that? And how does Revolancer address the geographical locations? And is that still something you struggle with?
Sure. Well, I mean, it's a very good point. And if you are based in a place with low cost of living, then of course you can charge less. And that could potentially be a problem for someone who's based in a place with a higher cost of living. But equally, you have a disadvantage too, because there's a huge advantage to being based in the States, for example. There are many companies in the States that would much rather work with a freelancer based in the States.
Sure, yeah.
Than a freelancer based in India, for a few different reasons, maybe time zone, maybe cultural differences, maybe just they kind of want to work with somebody closer to them. So we see that a lot too. So it's not just all kind of sunshine and rainbows for people who can, have a lower cost of living. But ultimately, I think the way to look at sort of pricing services isn't really looking at the freelancer. It's looking at what is the service worth to the company, right? So, if someone is building your website and this website is going to increase your revenue by, X amount, then it should be calculated based on that. Like, how much value is this project actually bringing to you, not where is this person based? Like, you want something of good quality, but no matter where someone is based, they can deliver good quality, but they should be paid what the project is kind of worth to the company, essentially. So that's how we think about it. And we have a skills exchange system between freelancers where we actually kind of help people calculate the pricing levels of certain services, like what is fair based on the data that we have, rather than like, where are you based? What are your monthly bills and that sort of thing.
No, I think that's interesting. So I've studied entrepreneurship for, well over a decade now. And I was reading this study once, and it talked about, and this is a U.S. study, and so other parts of the world for this particular study, but it talked about the hotbeds of entrepreneurship, and it was listing cities like San Francisco, Boston, New York, Austin, and all of these cities have a very high cost of living. And it was really kind of interesting because I would have thought that entrepreneurship would have, gravitated to places that have lower cost of livings to save on the labor. And it turns out that labor is actually not a driving force in the success of entrepreneurship. And, to your point of looking at the value of the services, was really what determined the success that a company would have. So,
yeah, absolutely.
I want to pivot a little bit and talk about a hot topic in the creative space, and that is AI. So you have a strong background in AI, and you have some expertise, and so I'd really like to hear from you. I've been following some other podcasters, influencers that are talking about AI and what that's going to do to the creative space, because we're entering into a realm where AI is becoming capable of doing what creators are doing. And there's argument back and forth of, well, is that really creating something, because all they're doing is they're just taking the existing information and, kind of like repurposing it versus actually creating something. But then there's definitely a cost advantage of, having some sort of, machine or technology doing it as opposed to hiring a person. Can you let's start by maybe laying the foundation of what AI means for the future of freelancers and creatives, And then maybe we'll get into some of the specific situations that you see, and kind of share your thoughts or opinions as where this might go. What are the opportunities and challenges that are going to be faced specifically for freelancers, creatives, and people in this space?
Sure. Well, first of all, I think that AI, a lot of different AI projects actually function as great tools for freelancers. For example, so you can use something like ChatGPT to help you write an article quicker, to help you kind of proofread things or reword things in a way that sounds better. But that doesn't mean that ChatGPT is in any way, shape, or form capable of replacing a human being. And the reason I say that is because ChatGPT is a very advanced predictive text algorithm that's basically, that's trained on 5 million or so web pages.
Right.
So it's like on your phone when it suggests what word you should type next. That's exactly kind of what ChatGPT fundamentally is. It's just had a lot more training data. And the thing is, it's very good at putting words in a certain order that make sense, and are kind of cohesive. But the problem is that ChatGPT doesn't understand what it is saying. So, and there are so many examples of this. I mean, you've probably yourself seen examples like this in your use of it, but some extreme examples include where it did a specialist doctor's exam and completely made up a condition to diagnose the patient with, just made it up. Another example is just within the last few weeks, there was a court case in the US where the plaintiff's lawyers used ChatGPT to generate that kind of research that they submitted to the judge. And there were a bunch of completely fabricated legal cases in there with favorable outcomes for their argument. So, and it's not, it's obviously not like something malicious. I mean, obviously the lawyers, that's ridiculous that they're not checking their own work there. But like ChatGPT isn't being malicious in making things up. It doesn't know. It's not sentient. It's just thinking like, what are words that will like look good based on the 5 million web pages I already read, like in what order.
Right.
So it's a useful tool sometimes, but it's a tool for a professional in an area to maybe make their work a little bit more efficient, or maybe it's something to stay away from if you're a lawyer, for example. So but if you're a copywriter, then hey, maybe it's useful. So I think like a lot of the conversation about AI is overblown. I think that it's useful in some ways. I think that it is, ridiculous and a bit of a toy in other ways. And ultimately, I think that freelancers should adapt by finding ways, if it's applicable, of kind of integrating AI into their workflow, and then really taking advantage of, being able to work more efficiently. Maybe now you can take more clients on because you've cut down the time it takes you to do X task by half, or, by 25% or whatever. But if a company were to try and use ChatGPT instead of hiring a copywriter, I don't think that, I think they'll get what they pay for, put it that way.
That's kind of interesting. As you were talking, the thought that came to my mind. So I actually speak French, but clearly I'm not a native. And so when I speak, people are like, "Oh, you have a charming accent," and sometimes they'll laugh at some of the things that I'll say. It will make sense that, like I can communicate just fine, but you can tell that I'm not a native speaker because of some of the word choices that I'm selecting. And so as you were talking, I'm like, yeah, ChatGPT has has an accent, I guess. It's not a native, a native speaker, if you could use sort of the the correlation there, and I think that's an interesting way to look at it. But there's another issue that has been brought up, and I'd love if you would weigh in on this. And I'm going to apologize up front. I'm putting you on the spot here, and I know that you are not a legal advisor. So this is by no means, I'm not asking you to be a legal advisor here, but I really would just like your opinion. So there's a lot of issues with copyright. So you'll have an artist. And when I say artist, I'm not talking just in the term of someone who like maybe designs, but you can have artists in many, I think that there are many professions where people consider themselves artistic as they create. And so you'll have these artists and they are feeling like their work is being stolen by artificial intelligence, and then it's being repurposed for someone else. And it's created this whole shift in the way that we look at intellectual property rights. And how do I protect myself? Because if I want something on the internet and then all of a sudden, AI is coming and grabbing that, but then they're changing it enough. We see songs all the time that it's like, well, this is a different. We all know the song. It's a remake of an old classic, but it's different. And so I've seen where you're seeing growing lawsuits where people are complaining that AI is stealing their work, but you can't really pinpoint it because, like you said, they're scouring 5 million websites. So what are your thoughts? And again, not from a legal advisory, but just your opinion on some of what do you see happening in the future with copyright? Do you think that artists are going to not be as open with some of their work? Maybe it will, like the internet is supposed to be very open and fluid, free form. Is it going to close that down a little because people will stop putting some of their best work online? What are some of your thoughts with this situation that's starting to come up?
Yeah, so it's a really, really interesting question. And I think that there are a lot of components to it. So, on the one hand, is very fair to see why people are frustrated. If you put a lot of time and effort into a certain creative work and it's now being scraped up by some classifier and then being used to generate an output that your work has kind of contributed to, that's maybe different enough for from a legal standpoint, but still. And that this output is now being sold to other people, and you're getting nothing.
Right.
It's frustrating. But then on the other hand, people are doing that. New artists are inspired by other artists and will create work similar to that, and they wouldn't have created their own work in the first place that way had they not been inspired by certain other pieces of work. So, there's that as well. Ultimately, I think what it comes down to is no matter what approach you take, whether you say like, no, this is bad, let's try and stop it, or this is fine, no matter what approach you take, I think the important thing is for there to be a level playing field, which means that, for example, let's say, and this has been a discussion, a platform like Reddit might say that they don't like that, these different AI classifiers and so on have been training on all of their user data. Now they want to charge companies to do that. Mm-hmm. So, and that's an example of where the playing field isn't necessarily going to be level, because then it's going to have a higher barrier of entry, and now only like massive tech companies will be able to afford to pay to have the right to do this kind of thing, and then it'll create a very unfair market environment. So I don't necessarily, I'm personally quite on the fence about it, but I think we should either pick it's allowed, it's fine, or we completely ban it. It's, it shouldn't happen. It has to be one or the other. It can't be anything in between, because that's going to create a very unfair environment.
That's interesting. I'd never actually thought about the equity behind using these technologies and what the implications would be. And I guess this is kind of similar to what happened, and I don't know exactly when, but I'm going to say maybe a decade ago, when you started getting these search engines, probably even more than a decade ago, but when search engines really started becoming powerful. And we can see today that, search engine technology is really in the hands of just a very few handful of major tech companies. And the amount of influence and power that these tech companies have, because they're determining where you end up online. If I put in a search, and YouTube has been criticized for this quite a bit because it's difficult to get on YouTube and really find an unbiased level of information. We see this a lot in the political environment, where if you've searched a whole bunch of stuff and you're on the conservative side of the political spectrum, then everything that you see is going to support that. And then someone who's on the liberal side of the political spectrum, they're going to have all of their information supporting them, and then it creates this this conflict where people are like, well, I saw this, and and they feel like it's fact based, and to an extent it is, but in reality, it's it's very it's very skewed facts. It's very heavily weighted to one side or another, and so that's an interesting thing when you talk about the equity of allowing the small players versus the major tech, and then the compensation that would go with that. Normally when I'm on the show, I try and lead in with another question. You just got me thinking so much that I'm sort of stuck right here. And I apologize for this moment for me where I'm kind of thinking, that's quite interesting.
I think you raise a very interesting point though with search engines. One other thing that search engines, especially Google, has been really criticized for doing is they will extract information from web pages to answer questions. So, if you Google a question, it'll sometimes come up with, people also asked this, and there's a drop down, and you click the drop down and they'll tell you the answer. So grab the answer from some website, which you're now not visiting, and they're displaying the answer right there. And then maybe it's a good thing for the website because they're being featured in this and more people will click through it. But ultimately, most people aren't going to click through. They'll just read the answer that's being highlighted there and then go away. And I think actually considering that, I think it is less likely that this kind of thing is going to be banned. And I think it is more likely that, sort of these AIs scraping and training on lots of public data, I think it's less likely to be banned. I think it's more likely to be completely allowed and kind of encouraged. And also, I think, unfortunately, it's also somewhat likely that companies, like large internet companies, are going to try and regulate it themselves, or at least, not regulate it necessarily, but try and skim some money off of it by charging other companies to kind of ingest that training data, which is going to lead to an uneven playing field, further advantaging these kind of big tech monopolies. So, yeah, and that's my unfortunately my kind of grim prediction that I feel is the most likely.
So, with that, and unfortunately, I also agree with your grim prediction. I think that big tech still holds the advantage, and it makes it challenging for entrepreneurs. So I want to bring this into you specific. So here you are you're an entrepreneur. Obviously, you don't have the resources that Google has. How do you feel? Because, with Revolancer, you've been able to carve out a space. You've been able to be successful. How do you feel that you can come in and compete and take it from, I am asking you specifically, but I'd like to broaden the question a little bit and say, okay, so what can entrepreneurs do to compete in that unfair environment where, the big tech, the big dollars, or big pounds, I guess. We'll try and be international here, but that's what has the advantage. So where do you see the small entrepreneurs carving out a space? What do you think their role is in helping to equalize this level of information? And just what are your thoughts on that front?
Sure. Well, I think that it's difficult, sure, but there are lots of things you can do. Like, I'll give you an example. In my case, we can allow people to talk outside the platform. And for them, it's not a simple case of them copying us because, we're a startup. We can experiment with different things. But a big company that is generating hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue every single year and is public and delivering a return to their shareholders, cannot suddenly say, okay, we're going to cut out our revenue stream now and we're going to experiment with something else. It just cannot happen, But freelancers obviously would prefer not to pay a quarter of their work, of their earnings to the platform they're on. They would obviously like to be able to communicate with their client in different ways. Clients want to be able to video call with freelancers, especially post-pandemic with that kind of trend. So it's just an example where, yes, we're a much smaller company. Yes, we don't have nearly as many resources, nor kind of, have we been around for very long, but we're growing very quickly. And these large platforms cannot really compete. They cannot realistically compete with us. But then herein lies the second, the kind of the problem there. So it is possible for entrepreneurs to do this, but oftentimes what will happen is a big company will then come along and say, hey, you're doing something interesting, I'm going to buy you.
Right.
And then just consolidate the market. And we've seen that so much with large tech companies. They're very actively buying smaller companies that are sort of challenging them in some way. And then for the entrepreneur, that's great because they get a nice big payday. But ultimately, in the long term for the industry, that's not great. But then equally, if you reject an offer like that, they might then just take the money they were going to give you to buy your company and put it into sort of creating some other spin-off that's going to drive you out of market because of their immense resources. So it's a very unfair playing field, and yeah, it's not great.
Well, and it's interesting. I mean, you're talking about acquisitions from large companies, and you kind of looked at it from the perspective that a company sees what, a large company sees what a smaller company is doing and has interest in them. But there are other aspects that I think are worth pointing out. And you alluded to the competition aspect where, if they decide that you're a big enough threat, then they just heap on the competition to the point that it smothers you. And they might not have a better offering, but they can, they can just flood your market to the point that, your profits become so difficult because the market is now flooded. And we'll see that type of practice. But you also, one thing that didn't get mentioned that I think is worth mentioning is when you look at these acquisitions, large companies fail to have a lot of creativity, and so they hit a certain point where all of their growth comes from acquisitions. Small companies have a huge advantage that they're more creative, they're more innovative, they're better problem solvers, they can move quickly, they're more agile. And I'm not saying that just because you're small that makes you more agile or makes you a better problem solver, but I am saying that a small environment is better fertile ground for growing that type of business. And so these large companies, if you look at, acquisition history versus revenue of large companies, it's crazy how that explodes at a certain point where they stop producing their own innovations and they start just acquiring other companies for innovations, and so yeah, a very, very interesting dynamic that that tends to happen, and so jumping back to and you did mention that as an entrepreneur, if you're given these opportunities, it usually is an opportunity. The entrepreneur, oftentimes will choose to sell, and I think that's a great thing. I don't want to criticize that in the slightest. If someone has an opportunity to be acquired and and they're really given a solid offer, they should congratulate themselves. But I do want to go back to kind of this question in my mind. You as an entrepreneur, do you feel any sort of responsibility to try and combat all of that? Do your little part to to make the world a better place, or do you look at it and say, no, my job is to just have a successful company, whatever that success is for me? How do you look at that in kind of the big moral, ethical dilemma as an entrepreneur?
Sure. Well, for me, I absolutely am primarily driven by changing the freelancing space for the better. But I'm also just acknowledging that realistically, no matter how good my intentions, it might be that at some point a large company, makes an offer to buy us, and then if we don't take it, they will dedicate a huge amount of resources to kind of driving us out of business. So at that point, it's not kind of what am I driven by as much as just would I rather take a nice payment, or would I rather kind of get driven out of the market? So, I mean, I'm not saying that would necessarily happen, but there are lots of instances where that kind of thing does happen, where entrepreneurs who aren't necessarily driven primarily by money do sell simply because if they don't, well, then the other company is essentially going to get what they want for free.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. And I will point out, in my experience, and I've been able to connect with hundreds, if not thousands, of entrepreneurs at this point in my career, and very few entrepreneurs are primarily driven by money. It's there's this thought that it's like, oh yeah, people just start businesses because they want to get rich, and I'm like, there are those out there, but it's actually a very small minority. Most entrepreneurs do it because they want to, push change. They do it because they want to solve problems. They do it because they personally are driven for excellence. And then, usually a little bit down the list, they're like, well, yeah, the money's good too, but, that's not a driving force that they have. And so, when you're talking and saying, yeah, I want to change the freelance world, I want to make it better for freelancers, I can see that, and I commend you for that. I think that's wonderful. So the final question or topic that I want to get into, and I feel like I would do a disservice if we didn't at least address this, and that is the freelancers themselves. So in 2020, COVID shocked the world, but it really sparked this freelance community. And, everyone who was a fence sitter all of a sudden found themselves stuck at home saying, well, why not? And so we saw this explosion of freelancers. I think we're getting to the point where, if you look at like a product lifecycle curve, we kind of are going through that shakeout where some people who were dabblers have decided that there's like, yeah, maybe freelance wasn't for me, or I'll keep it on the side. But there were a lot that really launched into, and, this is now their career. Many of them are replacing the the income from high-paying jobs as a freelancer. I don't know that I'm going to try and pinpoint whether it's right or whether it's wrong, but I would just like to hear your perspective. You work intimately with freelancers. What's your perspective on the freelance environment? What's it like? What would you recommend to people who are deciding whether to get in or out of freelancing? What are some of the pitfalls that you're like, yeah, when I see this happen, I say, you got to avoid that. So let's talk just a minute about that freelance environment.
Yeah, sure. So, I think as with any kind of environment, there are always things that could be better. But ultimately, I think freelancing is a fantastic environment to be in. And frankly, the kind of results speak for themselves. So today, there are 1.56 billion freelancers in the world. That's today. That's nearly a third of the global workforce.
That's insane.
It is. And McKinsey, a very credible company, they predict that by 2027, more than half of the U.S. workforce will be freelancers.
Can I interject with a clarifying question?
Absolutely.
So are these freelancers that are solely freelancers, or are they moonlighting? So are they still holding their job and freelancing, or did they just cut all ties and they're just freelancing?
I believe it's predominantly freelancing.
Okay.
So people who are predominantly kind of getting an income from freelancing, which is absolutely crazy. But, and then furthermore, Fiverr actually did their own little study where they were especially focusing on Gen Z, and found that 71% of Gen Z want to go into freelancing as opposed to a traditional career.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's really, some really crazy numbers that really speak for themselves. So I think it's a great environment to go into. Absolutely. I think there are things that could be better, and that's why I'm also trying to do something about that. But ultimately, if you want to get into freelancing, the best way to get started is to build your portfolio. Start with doing some projects for yourself, just some kind of projects to show off your skills. Find some clients, maybe offer a discount or do something for free. And then from there, kind of just get started by building up a client base, getting some great testimonials and getting your name out there. And I think that's a, pretty solid way to get started.
Wonderful. No, I appreciate it. So thank you so much, Karl. This has been very insightful. You definitely got my wheels turning. Even stopped me a couple times in the middle of the show where I just started thinking about some of the stuff that you said. So I really appreciate that. If anyone wanted to learn more about Revolancer, what's the best way to get information or connect with you or connect with your company?
Yeah, sure. So the best way would be, if you just Google my name, my LinkedIn profile and website should come up. And for Revolancer, just go to revolancer.com or Google Revolancer, and then you can get started there.
Perfect. And that information will be in the body of the text. And so if you want to check out the description here on the episode, you can go ahead and see where to connect with Karl and Revolancer. So, Karl, thank you so much for being a part of the show. This is Marketing, Management, and Money with your host, Ryan Murray, and we will catch you next time.